I should take a photo from here to show everyone what it looks like. This is behind the scenes Hollywood glamour.
Hey, everybody. Bobby, it's Tuesday. What does that mean? It's time for the 100's greatest hits.
That's correct.
Okay, so what's up, everybody? You're tuned into the fourth episode of the 100's greatest hits on the
Number
100's
four.
TV. My name is Free J Boozy, and I'll be taking
You look gigantic.
I don't know.
Compared
You
to
are a
me.
lot taller than me, though. It's the couch, you know?
It is the couch.
It's the couch.
It's kind of like a
But
lounge.
relax, man.
I'm relaxed. I'm relaxed.
Okay, so here every Tuesday at 4 p.m., 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, we're going to be taking you into the 100's vault. We're going to pull out timeless classics and tell you the stories behind each of them, as well as talk to the designers and the creatives that brought them to life. While you watch, you'll also be able to chat with other viewers and ask us questions about your favorite classics from the 100's past. You can also hit the shopping cart tab to purchase these one-of-one items to add to your personal collection. Now, if you're navigating from the homepage, you're going to go to the100s.com. You're going to hover your cursor over the 100's TV and then click on the greatest hits collection. All of the pieces we have posted from episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4 are available. Most of episodes 1 and 2 are sold out, but before we get into this week's haul, I just want to let you know that you can still get a couple amazing pieces, including the Shel Silverstein rip, featuring the legendary Wallace.
Wallace is on the shirt. It's
Wallace
Ben
is
and Di and Wallace on the shirt.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, let's just get right into it, man. How are you, Bobby? What's going on?
I'm good.
Yeah.
How did a lovely Tuesday?
How did the Lamb of God release go?
The Lamb of God release, as you know, did very well, and it was cool to see both of our worlds collide, Lamb of God's audience and ours. In fact, Mr. Blythe himself was just texting me because he's surfing out in somewhere out by Masonboro Island in North Carolina.
Yeah.
It's near Wrightsville Beach in Wilmington, and he's surfing out there.
It's like the Outer Banks vibe.
Yeah.
So Randy Blythe is the lead singer of Lamb of God. Yeah, him and Bobby are now best friends, self-proclaimed best friends.
Yes,
Linked
we are.
all the time.
Lincoln.
So yeah, that project was really cool. So that's what we were up to this week. Now we're going to take you into 100's greatest hits. So when I was digging through the vault with my good homie Awad, who was doing a lot of great work behind the scenes, shout out Awad. We discovered some Garfield tees in the vault.
Oh, okay, cool.
You know, and so I was kind of like looking into the 100's past, and there are 3 times where like Garfield has kind of come into your life.
Yes.
2010, 2018, and then Family Style.
Garfield's never really left my life, but in terms of relationship with the 100's, 3 times that we've collaborated with Garfield. Yeah.
Okay, so Garfield is a legendary 80s animation cartoon.
Yeah.
Right. So you're a product of the 80s, baby, 80s child.
That's right.
So how has Garfield like played a role in your development?
Garfield is actually from the 70s, 1978. Jim Davis was a cartoonist for the local paper in Muncie, Indiana. And he wanted to draw a comic strip about this guy, John Arbuckle. And 2 strips into this comic that he was developing, he realized that the audience, the readership of the town paper cared more about the cat than John himself. And so he turned the camera basically to the cat and said, why don't I make the comic centered around Garfield and Odie and his friends, and then it blew up. But where Garfield really succeeded was that they were the first ones to capitalize on licensing, which licensing in 2020, right, more than 40 years later, has become a staple of not just how collaborations work, but how brands in general grow from corporate to underground. But back then, licensing really didn't exist. It wasn't really a thing. And they licensed Garfield to, I believe, a Chinese or a Japanese toy manufacturer to make these stickies, sticky pod suction cup. They were called Stuck on You's, Garfield dolls that would stick to your car window.
Carlos has one.
So we made one with the most recent collaboration. That catapulted Garfield into the stratosphere, made it a household name, made a lot of money for it, and then they went from making comic books to all kinds of licensed consumer products. I got into it in the 80s because I was collecting the comic books. I loved his humor. I loved the illustrations. I learned how to draw by reading Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes, and my entire room was filled with licensed out Garfield merchandise, which is kind of akin to what our audience is like today. You know, buying a lot of the hundreds stuff, the hundreds rugs, the hundreds t-shirts, clothing that they live in. And so it's weird now as I'm an adult to see how my, you know, imaginary cartoon best friend, just like how John, you know, had this character that this cat that was his best friend. He had Garfield, I had Atom Bomb.
So it's really interesting how Garfield is kind of like the catalyst and one of the test subjects of kind of developing licensing, like you were saying. I didn't realize it went that deep.
Yeah.
So you said this was like one of the things that kind of inspired you how to draw. So you would just like trace
cartoons? I would literally trace Garfield. I wasn't a big tracer because I kind of knew it was cheating. So just freehanding trying to draw Garfield, he's actually really difficult. You start with the nose with many cartoon characters, but I learned how to draw by drawing Garfield, and then I read all of his books and his sarcastic humor, even his favorite food being lasagna. It was my favorite food growing up, even though lasagna is for the most part pretty gross. But I did it because of Garfield. And so, yeah, there's a lot of similarities and parallels between Jim Davis, the creator of Garfield, and what he did with his company and ours, except he made hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars doing it.
So how did you develop a relationship with Jim Davis?
At that time, I believe, you know, for years since we started the company, I kept reaching out because it was kind of like this bucket list dream collab to work with Garfield. I kept reaching out blindly through the website. And one day someone finally, like years later, someone finally reached out and said, hey, we're with Garfield and we'd like to talk to you about doing some work together. And they had never worked with a brand like ours before. And that's how, that girl was Ashley, who's actually Jim Davis's son. I flew out to Muncie, Indiana, which was an adventure in itself. I spent a day there. I flew into Indianapolis, drove an hour into the forest, into really the countryside, and went into this big orange barn, which is where Garfield headquarters was. And almost everyone in the company is related to Jim Davis, lives in that town, and sat with him for an afternoon as he explained his story and everything that the cartoon was about.
Awesome. Well, Bobby, I hate to break it to you, but the viewers broke my train of thought because the Mark Dean Beckett deck has sold.
Oh, already?
Already.
Okay.
So if you're just tuning in with us, you are tuning in to Greatest Hits on the Hundreds TV. And so this is a live shopping show. So all of the product that we were reviewing and going over from the Hundreds archive, from the Hundreds past, is available on the shop tab. So with that said, this beautiful Mark Dean Beckett deck has sold.
Wow. Okay. Did we even get to tell the story behind that?
We didn't. I mean,
Mark Dean Beckett is an old friend of ours.
Real quick,
yes,
before we get into that.
Yes.
This is the Garfield and Friends t-shirt from 2010, which is for sale.
Wow.
Which is for sale right now for $100. You can check it out. It's very, very clean. No flaws, really. It's got a good wear. The owner of this took very good care of it. So for sale now.
It has a special label associated with it too. Oh, show the back, just the way that the solid bomb is. We have Garfield position up top. That was the logo lockup. When I talk about best collaborations we've ever done, I often refer to the Hundreds and Garfield because Jim Davis was so gracious in giving us his characters and his properties for us to kind of do whatever we wanted with. And it's not always that way, especially with licensing projects. Just allowing us to have the logos touching and engaging with each other is a really big deal in licensing and collaboration work.
So you're saying the fact that like he is wearing an atom bomb.
Yeah, that's called, like, literally there are clauses in contracts about logos touching. Logos being on the same plane is hard enough to get, meaning Garfield himself and Atom Bomb being on the same side of a shirt that's on the same plane, let alone touching is a big deal, let alone endorsing, which Garfield is now endorsing our brand everywhere. So that's a really big deal. He's wearing our Johnson Lowe shoes, which we had a footwear program at the time. Those are our shoes. Nermal is carrying our skateboard with the Jags print on it. Arlene is done punk rock style to reflect all the different California subcultures. And yeah, so this was a dream project in every which way. It said a little bit something about us. It reflected on my history and my experiences, you know, and they were just such a pleasure to work with. But
awesome.
yeah,
So for
very
sale
special
now
piece.
on the 100 greatest hits.
But yeah, that Mark Dean Becca board, can we talk about that?
Yeah, let's talk about it. So this is actually from the Ben Hundreds vault.
Yeah, this is one of Ben's boards.
Yeah, so this is one of Ben's boards. So we were trying to figure out some, you know, more unique, kind of deeper Hundreds vault product to throw up.
Yeah.
On greatest hits, and we chose this deck. One thing that immediately strikes me about Mark Dean Becca's art is just like the psychedelic atmosphere.
Yeah.
Kind of just like how it goes back to, like, you know, nods back to him growing up in the Bay Area and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, how did that relationship develop, and how did this product get made?
Yeah, at that time, do you remember what year it was?
Yeah, so this is 2010-11. So it was two parts. So 2010 was the first part of the collab, and
which
then
was
this
like
dropped
t-shirts and hoodies.
It was
stuff?
printables based, and then this dropped with the shoes when you guys still had a footwear program.
Right,
also.
as part of the footwear program.
So this was 2011.
So 2010, 2011, in the late 2000s, Mark Dean Becca was doing a lot of work with Cause at the time. And Cause was a different cause than we know now, obviously still very popular at the time, but not like as big and pervasive as he is now. But Cause lived across the street from Mark Dean Becca. In many ways, Mark was one of his favorite artists, if not his favorite artist at the time. So they were doing a lot of collaborative work together. We were fans of Cause, obviously, and that's how we were introduced to Mark's work, and we reached out to Mark. And then I just was immersed in his style to watch him actually doing all the cross hatching in person, which is this kind of like grid type brushwork, just the steadiest hand. A lot of the elements of his art are kind of remind me of Dr. Seuss's work and Dr. Seuss's hand. And so he manipulates and reappropriates a lot of Americana corporate logos, parodies, and flips a lot of cartoon characters that we all grew up loving in his own style. So he did, like Justin was saying, a series of printables, some t-shirts and hoodies, and then he did a series of decks. And that was right when we were beginning our artist series skateboard program. I think the very first set we ever made was with a tattoo artist named Jun Cha, who we were really early on him. We were the first to work with him, and now he's a very big established tattoo artist. I want to say that this was maybe the second series in terms of like a deck, a series of 3 skateboard decks. And these blew out right away. Right after that, I think we did James Jean, and we continued the artist series even up to today with all the Stanley Kubrick decks that recently dropped. But yeah, this is one of those 3 that go into the set of the Mark Dean Becca boards, but very, very rare. I don't even have a set of these. So there you go.
So yeah, somebody will enjoy this on their wall or shred it like Chris Harris does.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, this sold on Greatest Hits. Also just got to update that the ramp, we weren't even going to go over this to you. I might as well just bring it up. So now that you guys are kind of seeing how product is moving, this is TH Rampage Rip. Very rare. TH instead of the hundreds being listed.
Very rare. Again, I've mentioned this before. Anytime you see just TH on any of the hundreds items, that is very early, because at some point we had to stop using it because of Tommy Hilfiger, which is also ironic considering our relationship with Tommy, if you've read my book. But this was a graphic that, one of the early graphics that a designer named Benji Escobar did for the brand. He was our head graphic designer for years, and this was very early on. Rampage was a classic video game, arcade video game that I grew up playing, and it was kind of like the cool, fun game when we were in the late 80s and into the 90s. And so many younger viewers might remember it more for the Rock movie. Like they turned it into a movie, I believe. Like
with Dwayne Johnson in it.
Yeah, The Rock. Like The Rock was the star of this movie, but I remember it for this arcade game. Then it became a popular Nintendo in terms of the original Nintendo. There was a time when there was actually just only a Nintendo console. But yeah.
Good times, right, Bob?
Yeah.
All right, so yeah.
It already sold?
So yeah, it's already sold. So the thing about
Wow.
this program is all of the pieces we are going over from the Hundreds Vault are all one of one. So this is the only shirt we have up. So don't sleep on this stuff. If you are interested, really encourage you to go and shop the Greatest Hits collection. There's tons of great stuff from the Hundreds Vault.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everyone. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see kind of like the support we've gathered with just like, and you know, it's awesome because the Hundreds has been around long enough that it's very multi-generational now.
Yeah.
So not only are we like tapping back in and bringing back some fond memories for fans and customers that have been with us for a while, but now we also have the opportunity to introduce people to like don't really know about how deep the history goes.
There are people, the Hundreds fans who know me, and then there are the Hundreds fans, the next generation, who know you more than they know me.
So that's
Justin.
And so, yeah, actually.
This is very special. This is kind of a big deal.
So this is kind of.
I did not know you were going to do this. This is a big deal.
So I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah.
So me and Awa were looking at these T-shirts.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, let's go over some Disney tees. And we're like, wait, but this isn't actually a licensed Disney
t-shirt. that is in many ways unlawful.
Yes. So I just kind of have I just want to know what's the story behind this bootleg Lost Boys tee.
Yes.
And was it an official collab?
It was not an official collaboration with Disney. So the Lost Boys are, if you've ever watched Peter Pan, read the book, or seen the play, the Lost Boys exist in Never Never Land. They are kids that never grow up and spend their entire life fighting off pirates. I've loved and been enamored with the Lost Boys, especially the Disney movie version of those characters since I was a kid. I just thought that they were the coolest. They look the coolest, but they also live the best life. Oh, also, when I was growing up, there was a movie called Hook that still holds up. I just watched it recently again.
Still holds up.
Still watching Robin Williams, the Lost Boys,
right?
Spielberg, Dustin Hoffman as Hook, Gwyneth Paltrow's very first movie. Her dad, Bruce Paltrow, was Steven Spielberg's friend, and Steven was like, I need a girl to play young Wendy. Anyways, it goes on and on. But the Lost Boys have always just been the coolest characters. And so this was a really early shirt that we did. I wanted to do something that was a ripoff of the Lost Boys, just to talk about how the Hundreds, we often felt like we were these kind of parentless children running around, anti-authority, fighting off pirates, whether pirates or corporate pirates or whatever you wanted to classify them as. And I've talked about this before, but in those days, Google Images didn't exist at all. If you were to Google any types of photos, it was hard to find what you were actually looking for. I, for the life of me, could not find a high resolution version of those characters. Also, the Peter Pan movie, back then, this was in the early 2000s, you couldn't just on demand a movie. There was no Netflix, Disney Plus. You couldn't even go to Blockbuster and just find Peter Pan. It had to be in season. Disney would release movies out of the vault every so often. And so you would have to go on eBay and try to find the DVD, which was hard. So anyways, it was impossible to even find Peter Pan, the movie, for me to lift the characters from. And I finally found an old children's book that on eBay of Peter Pan, the Disney version, took those characters and realized even scanning them in at high resolution didn't look good enough. So I just traced silhouettes to basically get as close as I could to those Lost Boys. And then when you turn it around, I wrote Lost Boys in this Disney font. It says, "We are the music makers. We are the dreamers of dreams." That is a quote. It's attributed to many different people, but it's really popularized by Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. Not Charlie and Chocolate Factory, but Willy Wonka, which was the Gene Wilder version. And Willy Wonka says this, that we are the music makers, we are the dreamers of dreams. That became our mantra in those days. It is also the opening quote to my book. Lost Boys done in this Disney style, but also very reflective of like early Stussy writing. So I wanted the whole thing to feel like this very Southern California beachy vibe t-shirt. And so that was a total illegal parody of Peter Pan's Lost Boys, not sanctioned by Disney at all.
And so I don't know if this is like an intuitive decision, but you know, whenever you go to Disneyland or Disney World, like the sort of family reunion, like customized, like family Disney tea is a thing.
Yeah.
Where it means like the whole family will have
Yes.
like an
Yes.
iron-on Aladdin tea or
Yeah.
something like that. And so to me, this is kind of like the unofficial hundreds gang
Yeah.
like Disney T-shirt.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what's also cool about this is this has the 2007 to 2009 atom bomb tag. So this is how you know this is some old hundreds gear. This tag, I've been digging through the vault, and this is a tag I come far and few between. So yeah, so this is for sale now on the hundreds greatest hits.
But this shirt right here is very special.
Okay, so before we move on to this, did this inspire or
inform this?
Did this like set in motion?
It did in a way. It did in a way. We did a lot of Disney parodies and rips at that time, again, without Disney's permission. And just flying under the radar because we were small.
Yeah.
Yeah. And were you going to say something?
No, I was going to ask about the size of the company.
We were just so small, and streetwear was so small. Like we were so outside of the spotlight that you can kind of get away with a lot of that stuff. And
so when did that change? So I understand it's like a brand thing, but it seems like even late, like when did the licensing thing become like such an integral part of streetwear?
I'd say maybe in the last 5 to 7 years.
Because now it's like if you're not in the licensing game, like
I know, and
you're making printables.
Because back then studios didn't give much weight to streetwear. They just didn't think there was a lot of money there, which there wasn't. You know, it wasn't streetwear wasn't mainstream, so they didn't really mind. Like legal departments weren't really putting streetwear under a microscope and just to ensure that we weren't infringing on their properties and their trademarks and stuff. But as streetwear grew, those studios, movie studios, anyone who held intellectual property, IP, meaning like people who own the rights to that movie or those characters. A lot of people own the rights to these characters. It's not just Disney, it's also the artists who drew those characters. Like everyone had to sign off. Everyone deserves money for their work. And so as streetwear grew, a lot of those studios got savvy and said, hey, there's money there. We have to make sure, number one, that people aren't stealing from us. And number two, how do we capitalize and work with these brands to make money together? And so that's how this happened, is that at that time, we were ripping off Disney so much that we got on their radar to the point where our attorney friends were calling us saying, hey, we're hearing within the grapevine of the attorney world that Disney's really going to come after you hard. And at the next Magic trade show, someone came from Disney, visited our booth and said, hey, we know you rip us off a ton. Instead of doing it the illegal way, why don't we just do it the right way and do a licensed collaborative project where you pay us a royalty, we'll give you the assets, we'll sign off on everything, and you can sell as much of it as you want. You don't have to be embarrassed about it. It was a really, really big deal on many levels. Just spiritually for the brand, we got a lot of pushback from our audience in that we were collaborating with a corporation. And that seems like such a foreign concept in 2020. But in 2006 or 2007, or whenever we released this actual official Lost Boys Peter Pan collaboration, that was the chatter that the 100 sold out because we were collaborating with a corporation. At that time, streetwear was really only just about working with independent artists, small brands, small mom and pop shops. And to go with Disney was like a total sellout move. And the only way that we could justify it was, and we still very much carry on this philosophy today, that when we work with other partners and collaborators, we have to look like in the end that we made out better than they did, especially if they're a brand of that scale and size, that we got paid well, that we threw a really great event against it, whatever it looks like, we have to look like as a brand that we had the upper hand in the equation. And so I think we ended up getting that with this Disney project. Disney came to us and said, let's do something legitimately. You guys love Mickey Mouse. You know, Bobby does a lot of Mickey flips and you can have access to Mickey. That's our sacred property. I said, no, I don't want Mickey. I don't want anything obvious. I want to go deep into Peter Pan. I want to do the Lost Boys. And Disney didn't understand. They weren't promoting Peter Pan at the time. Again, it was in the archives. It wasn't a popular movie that they were pushing. They were like, hey, right now we're pushing, I don't know, Toy Story or something. They're like, what about these new movies? And I was like, no, I really want this obscure set of characters because there's a lot of substantive storytelling there. I know it's not the sexiest and it's not Mickey Mouse the most well known. You know, most people don't even know this guy's name, but I was like, the story is so rich that I have to tell it. And so they're like, okay, I guess they still didn't understand it. Disney at the time, and this was always Disney's problem, was their consumer products is bought by children and women. It was really hard for them to get access to men, especially teenage guys. As we all know, teenage guys are the hardest people to infiltrate in terms of marketing and sales. What do you buy them aside from sneakers these days? Drugs and video games. And so Disney was like, how do we penetrate this market?
Yeah.
And so they use us as a Trojan horse. We use them, you know, to make all this, to flip their properties. This, I can go on, but the Disney, the Hundreds Lost Boys project broke so many rules in their licensing Bible. Number one, we wrote the Hundreds in the Disney font. Somehow got away with that. Again, they were not really paying too much attention to us because we were small fries. Streetwear was small fries, and the Hundreds was almost non-existent on their radar. I don't even think most people there knew that this collaboration was happening. So I submitted this artwork. I then put the Hundreds and Disney on top of each other, which is a huge no-no.
It's like, yeah.
Like it's almost like Disney made this like as a studio, like it's a movie or something.
That's just a little
like I was talking about with merging logos, this was our trademark pattern, which was called Jags, and this character has been updated to the 2008, 2009 version of a fixed gear hype beast looking character with a bandana on and shutter shades.
And so this is Nibs.
This is Nibs, yeah, of the Lost Boys. This was Nibs.
When you're talking about the whole like sort of fixie culture, so you wanted to represent different elements of Los Angeles and California culture, and
right?
Kind of fuse that. And fixie life is very, very, very real in Los Angeles. Anybody that has a perception of Los Angeles not being a bike city is out of their mind. So for me, this really hits hard because I love biking.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's really great, especially how you guys incorporated the Jags and just like always putting those like fundamental Hundreds building blocks to build like new stuff,
Each character was inspired loosely by someone from the crew.
Mm-hmm.
This one was kind of reflective of a guy named Tony, who still is with us. DJ Why Not? He used to run a blog on our website called DGAF. This was Tony. That's Tony's bike. It was a neon pink fixed gear bike, and that was an homage to him. So anyways, that project, the Hundreds Disney Lost Boys, still legendary in streetwear lore. It sold out immediately across the country. We only sold it to 3 or 4 stores. I think they have lineups.
Also, remember the quantities were extremely limited, so you only made 200 of each colorway of each tee.
I think so. Which at the time,
that's a lot of product at the time. But now that you think about minimums and having to order with licensed collabs and stuff, like that's like no product. So the cool thing about this one is it is for sale now. The Hundreds Greatest Hits collection. There are some flaws. There are some staining. There is some staining and some wear. So definitely check that out. But there is a lot of beauty in the uniqueness of warm clothing. And so, I just kind of wanted to go over something. So, I am very fortunate and gracious to be the Hundreds host. And I just wanted the Hundreds Greatest Hits host. I just wanted to give you a little bit of my background and why I am qualified to talk about this stuff. So
it's about time we hear the story.
So I've been thrifting clothing probably since 2006 and 7. My mom really got me on to the whole really searching for your own individual and unique style, because the Red Cross would do a huge flea market at these old barns in Virginia. So people from all over the state would come with stuff from the 20s, 30s, clothing like old sportswear from the 50s, like all this stuff. And like also like 80s, 90s, all this stuff. So we really began digging there. Fast forward, went to college in a town called Richmond, Virginia, linked up with the guys that started a brand and store called Round 2. And so I was really an integral part of getting the first inventory of Round 2. Round 2 is like a really well-known like streetwear resale platform. And so we were kind of the first guys on the East Coast, like really breaking in to like the mid-Atlantic region of like thrifting and getting our own fits. And we dressed like completely different than like anybody anywhere. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is like before wearing 91 Bulls t-shirts like was a thing. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so, yeah, eventually round two allowed me to move out here, and we kind of grew the business further and further, and just all of a sudden kind of like took over the whole vintage scene. And so I was already, one of the really cool things about being at a store like that is not only the people I got to meet, but the quantities of product that I have seen. Like I'm saying pallets and pallets of clothing, like digging through just like so many different areas of product. I've just been really fortunate to like have eyes on more product and more different kinds of styles than most people working in the fashion space.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I just like really have developed an eye for old aesthetics and stuff like that. And so very fortunate to then join the Hundreds team and kind of develop my knowledge of this idea of establishing an idea of collectors vintage with the Hundreds has been really cool. And also it's such a learning experience for me because every single episode I'm researching the old blogs and stuff, and there's so much great content that you can really check out on thehundreds.com. You know, the blog just goes back until like 2006. I'm reading stuff, you know, like 2007. So yeah, it's just really cool to dive into the brand history and to tell these stories to like, not only am I learning about the Hundreds narrative, and then we get to teach other people about the brand history.
Right.
So with that said, this concludes episode 4 of Greatest Hits. Now, you can catch us here every single week, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Every Tuesday, we upload new product and then tell you the stories behind this product. So if you go ahead and check out the shop tab, you can check out what's left on the Hundreds Greatest Hits collection. And we will see you next week. Thank you, Bobby Hundreds, as always.
Thank you, Justin. Free J Boosie. Please follow Free J Boosie on Instagram.
I'll be on there, you know, get some
He
laughs.
is on there.
Give you some laughs, give you some inspo.
Justin, I have to say something. Justin is a true Renaissance man. He's a solid musician, jazz musician. You can listen to his music on Spotify.
It's true. You can search Free J Boosie and
Free J Boosie.
Tracks up.
J Boosie is so free, FREE. J, the letter J, and BOOSIE.
Yeah, so check me out. I'm, you know, like you said, natural Renaissance man. Bridging the gap between music and fashion and culture. Greatest hits, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Woo! You got that, dude?
We're good. It's a wrap.
Okay. That was good. We sold a bunch of shit, too.
Damn.
Sold you from last week, too.
Yeah, Rampage
Yeah.
sold a beautiful